Thank you, Amy. Thank you for bringing me back to Florida in February. I should have started off with a picture of my garden in the snow, which was what I left on Thursday. So it's always nice to get back to UF, and especially nice to come at this time of year, and to be back in my, home college, in the College of Education. So I would like to keep this really informal. And I'm happy to entertain questions as we go along, or we can, there'll be time for questions at the end. And so what I'm going to talk about is Brexit and its impact specifically on the sector that I work in, which is higher education, but also in the context of Northern Ireland, which is particularly important that where I work and where we sit in Northern Ireland has the potential to be most negatively impacted, let's say, by Brexit. So what I'd like to cover first is the Brexit vote. I'm guessing, how many of you are political scientists in the room? Yeah, sort of, as a closet political scientist.
My undergrad.
Okay. But you're all probably familiar with Brexit, so I'm going to gloss over that pretty quickly. But I am going to talk a little bit more about the history and context of Northern Ireland. There's probably a few people that know more about that here, but we really can't think about Brexit and the impact on higher education or on any other sector without understanding some of the history of Northern Ireland. That's really what's driving the bus right now, as far as whether or not we get a withdrawal agreement, and how that looks after we finally leave. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about higher education and Brexit in the UK context, and then focus on the impact that I'm seeing every day when I go to work at Queen's University in Belfast. So, Brexit and Northern Ireland. So, where and what is Northern Ireland? It is this little, I didn't bring a thing, so it's this little blob here on the northeast corner of the island of Ireland. It was created in 1921 as a result of the partition of the island after the Irish War of Independence, and it is 6 of 32 counties on the island. So it's dark green, 6 counties in the north of the island. Why did Northern Ireland come into existence? Why, after the Irish War of Independence, did Ireland not, as an island, become one nation? Well, during English colonisation, occupation of Ireland, there were a lot of movement into Ireland by people from the rest of Britain. So, particularly in the northeastern corner of Ireland, there were lots of settlers who moved in from Scotland and parts of northern England, but especially from Scotland, who were of a Protestant faith, predominantly Presbyterian, which was completely different from the local people in the rest of Ireland who were Catholic. And so when it came to dividing the island, that Protestant community in Northern Ireland were the majority in those 6 counties, and they did not want to be separated from the rest from England and Scotland and Wales. So we ended up with this division on the island, the division in the population actually still exists today. So we are increasingly coming to a 50-50 kind of split between the historically Protestant Unionist population. So Unionist meaning that people wanted to stay affiliated with the Union, with the United Kingdom. And then the predominantly Catholic Republican population who wanted to be really part of the Republic of Ireland. So, Protestant Unionists were the majority by far, and increasingly that balance is shifting due to migration, due to the number of children that families have, and so on. So we're getting to a point where we're nearly even. In Northern Ireland today, we have about 1.8, 1.9 million people, about 3% of the population of the UK. but 6% of the land mass, so probably one of the least densely populated parts of the UK after like the Highlands of Scotland. So not a very big population. But like the rest of the UK, we were asked to vote in the referendum and indicate whether we wanted to leave or remain. And this was the ballot. So it was really complex. You know, basically, put a check mark, you wanted to leave or you want to remain part of the EU. And the referendum came about because the previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, had promised in his election manifesto in 2015 that he would give the people a vote. And he made this promise, I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he made the promise thinking, no problem, we're gonna get a nice majority to stay in the EU, and this will kind of, it'll quell all of those discussions and controversy about how much we're paying and all of that. And he went actually to the EU after announcing the referendum and tried and negotiated a better deal for the UK and thought people would definitely support that. But unfortunately, in my opinion, we voted to leave. I personally definitely voted to remain, but the majority, by a small margin, voted to leave. So 52% of the population approximately voted to leave. But it wasn't a nice homogeneous geographic spread of leavers versus remainers. So Scotland, and you might have heard quite a bit about this in the news, they actually had their own poll, a referendum previously to become independent, which had not passed. But they predominantly voted to stay part of the EU, 62%. Followed closely by the Greater London area, a lot of concern in the City of London and the financial sector and so on to stay part of the EU. And then Northern Ireland, almost 56% voting to stay within the European Union. But despite the fact that all of those Scots and many of the people that identify as Irish in Northern Ireland wanted to stay in the EU, basically the vote was driven by the English population, much larger population, much denser population than we have, and no option for the regions to make their own agreements. So we are leaving as a nation, even though large areas voted to stay in. So Northern Ireland and how the vote broke down is pretty interesting. The yellow being those who wanted to stay in the EU, and the blue being those that would like to leave. The yellow, obviously, the people that voting to stay in the EU all around the border area, the whole border voting to stay, a lot of the rural areas voting to stay. A small or a reasonable section of Belfast here, again reflecting financial sector concerns, business concerns, reflecting some demographics in the population in that area. And what is particularly interesting is when you map that vote onto how we identify as a people, or how people individually identify. So like I was saying, we had this influx of settlers from Scotland way back when, and there's a very strong Ulster Scots heritage in the north and the east of the province. And many of the people in that part of Northern Ireland identify as British. So they voted much like their English counterparts, and they voted to leave. They were led very strongly by their political parties. So the Democratic Unionist Party, that's incredibly important in all of the discussion about Brexit now, campaigned vehemently to leave. They want to protect the union with the UK. They want to keep that tight affiliation with England, and they followed the Conservative Party, or the hard Brexiteers in the Conservative Party, and they voted to leave. So their electorate followed suit in the north and east and voted to leave. The majority of areas where people identify as Irish voted to stay, very much wanting to be affiliated with the rest of Ireland, which was obviously remaining in the EU. So I think it's important to think a little bit about the border history, because we get a lot of, there's so much discussion about the border now. So The border in Northern Ireland has been a contentious issue for over 30 years. We had an armed conflict in Northern Ireland, what we euphemistically call the Troubles. Basically, armed militia, terrorist organizations, undertaking a campaign of violence in the province for 30 years. Started in 1969 with real vengeance and continued through into the 1990s. And even though Ireland and Northern Ireland and the UK were all members of the EU at that point, and with free movement of people and goods and services, the border in Northern Ireland was not particularly open. In fact, it was patrolled, it was blocked in places, there were armed, the army were on the border, there were checkpoints to go through the border, and I can remember very vividly as a kid going across the border and you would sit in the car for hours. I mean, sometimes you would literally sit in a car for 2 or 3 hours at the border waiting to get through the checkpoint. Now, they weren't asking for a passport. They didn't care about your citizenship. And they weren't looking at customs issues or excise or anything like that. They were looking for arms. They were looking for terrorists. They searched the cars. They had mirrors that they looked underneath the cars. They got all the kids out of the back seat and they would look under the back seat of the car. And, you know, it is a very vivid memory for people of my generation. And we are desperately concerned that we're going to end up with what they call a hard border. Maybe not a militarized border like this was, but nobody wants to go back to this. So it's a real hot button like issue that we, there's a lot of passion about the border in Northern Ireland. So the border effectively, I wouldn't say disappeared, but it became sort of invisible to most of us after the peace agreement in 1998, which was signed by Tony Blair and other leading politicians of the time, and they were supported by the likes of Bill Clinton. Senator George Mitchell, American senator, was really key to our peace agreement. And that peace agreement did a number of things, and some of the important things were established local government for us. We did not have local government until that point. We hadn't had local government for several decades, and so the local government was established as a power sharing government. So the political parties on both sides agreed to share power, which has proven to be very difficult. It also decommissioned weapons, so the IRA and the Unionist militia turned in weapons. Also established the rights to citizenship, so those of us that were born in Northern Ireland can currently hold a British passport or an Irish passport, or both. I have both, and an American passport, so 3 passports. But so we are entitled to identify as one, the other, or both. And very importantly, all border checkpoints were removed. So now you drive across the border. Has anybody, Maria might have, has anybody crossed the border into Northern Ireland? Oh, wow. Preaching to the choir here, I should. But so you drive across the border like you're going from Georgia to Georgia. You don't even notice it. I mean, there are a few clues. The lines on the side of the road change colour. And if you don't blink, you'll see a small sign that says "Welcome to Northern Ireland" or "Welcome to the Republic of Ireland." And that is about it. Speed limits change, and it goes from miles per hour to kilometres per hour. That is effectively it. You don't notice the border at all. And so people move freely across the border, trade moves freely across the border, and it's been transformative for Northern Ireland. Totally transformed our economic development, social development, our quality of life. I mean, it is not the same country that I left in 1993. So, again, the deep concern about what's going to happen with the border as a result of Brexit. And then I can't really move on to higher education without touching on just a few recent political developments. And Amy and I were just talking about one of these before we started. But being also an American citizen, I follow American politics, and you've probably obviously had a recent shutdown in the American government of a record of 30-some days, 32 days. Northern Ireland hasn't had a local government for more than 2 years. Which, the most pivotal, critical 2 years in the discussions of what's going to happen in terms of Brexit. And most of our political parties are not at the table. I say most because one is at the table very strongly, but the rest are not there. So the parties that represent lots of segments of our population are not really involved in the conversation. I mean, they've gone to Europe and they've had discussions and they've met with the Prime Minister. But we don't really have effective representation for Brexit, in my opinion, and I think that's the feeling that's held very broadly across, across Northern Ireland. Government broke down. They had a big falling out about an energy project, and then they can't agree on language, which is, hilarious to me because I work in South Africa a lot where they have, 13, official languages. We can't figure out, to have English and Irish, and then they want Ulster Scots, which is really a dialect and not a language. So they've had this huge falling discussion. So we have no government. So this is our government, our Parliament building. It's very coincidentally just has a big no entry sign in front of it. Seems to be appropriate. But I mentioned there was one party that is very much at the table, and that is the Democratic Unionist Party. And I'm sure many of you have been following the news or aware of their involvement. So Theresa May decided to have an election shortly after she became the Prime Minister. And I guess she thought she was going to improve her majority and strengthen her hand for negotiating Brexit. And in the end, she lost her parliamentary majority. And so they entered into this confidence and supply agreement with the DUP, which means effectively, and I hope I'm describing this correctly, but the DUP caucus essentially with the Conservative government and vote with them on issues around the budget and foreign affairs and so on. And they now wield an unbelievable amount of power for a very small party of 10 MPs that represent a small segment of the Northern Ireland population that is already a very tiny segment of the UK. So that continues to impact where we're going with the withdrawal agreement. And then we've had lots of border protests. People living near and on the border been protesting, worried about what's going to happen. The border itself is 310 miles long, over 300 places that you can cross it. I was telling Amy they have been doing a TV comedy skit show called Soft Border Patrol. They have, little sketches of, crossing the border in a farmer's field and like walking over the plank to get across from one side to the other. But it's not that unrealistic. I mean, there are literally border crossings that are small, unpaved country lanes. So everything from the major crossings and major motorways, highways to these small areas. Hundreds of thousands of lorries, cars crossing the border every month, and more than 30,000 people cross the border every day to work. So really key, to our economic development and sort of security. So it's the border, net contributor to the EU, but Northern Ireland has been a net beneficiary from the EU. We've had millions, probably billions in fact, of euros of funding from the EU. Everything from the infrastructure, the train I sit on every morning has been funded by the EU sign on it. Road construction that's actually still ongoing with money from the EU structural funding. Agricultural funding, we're a predominantly agricultural country and or province, and lots and lots of subsidies to agriculture. So we stand to lose all of this, or lose access to a lot of it. Security concerns are another issue. For those of you that follow the news, you know that we had a car bomb in Derry, our second largest city, just a few weeks ago. I watched the news and I felt like I was back in 1980 something. And the new IRA, one of these militia organizations, is active and increasingly active. And it may not just be because of Brexit, but any excuse to them and the troubles could kick off again. And then, of course, the concerns about movement of goods and people, and how is that going to be managed? So I thought when I took this talk that I was going to be standing here and we'd be able to talk about the withdrawal agreement and how that was going to impact Northern Ireland and how it was going to impact the work I'm doing, and we still don't have a withdrawal agreement. Theresa May was in Northern Ireland today. I think she was there to try and garner kind of public support for her attempt to go back to the European Union to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement that she agreed to several months ago. The EU said it's not renegotiable, so I'm not sure how that's going to play out. But Parliament in London, by a whopping historic vote, kicked out the agreement that she came back with the first time around. So, and the Democratic Unionist Party voted against it and campaigned vigorously against it, and were on every news programme talking about how it wasn't fair, it was unacceptable that Northern Ireland would be treated any differently than the rest of the United Kingdom. We're already different than the rest of the United Kingdom, by the way. I mean, there are already checks on agricultural goods coming back and forward. We already have very different legislation on lots of issues. So it's an interesting, and some of that legislation is supported by the Democratic Unionist Party. They're very socially conservative, so they don't want some of the legislation, like gay marriage, for example, is not acceptable in Northern Ireland. It's not permissible in Northern Ireland. And the DUP have campaigned against those things. So they want to be different, but they don't want to be different. So anyway, we are waiting to see if we get a withdrawal agreement before the 29th of March. If not, we will be going out of the EU with no deal. So higher education. How am I doing on time, by the way?
It's fine, we started a bit late, you good?
Okay. So higher education in the UK. We have 162 publicly funded universities and colleges. It says here that we have 5 in Northern Ireland. That's actually incorrect. We have 6. 2 universities, Queen's University in Belfast and the Ulster University, and then 4 colleges that are akin to like community colleges here. And then we have, across the UK, somewhere around 2.3 million students, 400,000 plus staff, which when we talk about staff, we're talking about faculty and sort of teams staff. So of that 400,000, about half of them are faculty. Oops, wrong way. And higher education is a pretty big contributor to the economics across the UK, with 35 billion in income and expenditure. Of the students and staff that come from that are at the universities and colleges, 14% of undergraduates are from somewhere outside the UK. 35% of graduate students come from outside the UK, and 30% of our academic staff, our faculty, come from outside the UK. About 6% of students are from the EU, but almost 12% of staff are from the EU. So big numbers of our staff come from other European countries. And in terms of what I do day to day, 17% of research income is received from other parts of the world, but 11% of research income to UK universities comes directly from the European Union. Just having a quick look at the breakdown, so 85,000 undergrad students from the EU, and somewhere around 45,000 graduate students. Postgraduate taught is like master's degrees, postgraduate research, pure research PhDs. So where do they come from? To the UK, the majority or the largest sending countries for students are Germany, France, Italy, and then Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the largest sending country would be the Republic of Ireland. Lots of students come north, and lots of our students go south to study at Trinity or UCD. So there's a lot of students back and forth. So Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland would be important sending countries for each other. In terms of staff, so again, remember that breakdown between faculty and teams was 12% come from the EU, but overall, when you start looking at just faculty, 18% come from the EU. Much fewer of our team staff come from outside Northern Ireland. Those are administrative and clerical staff, and they tend to come from within the province. And then look at that third bar down in research. So of the faculty involved in research, more than a quarter of them are from the EU. So again, the ramifications for us in terms of Brexit are really significant. Our intellectual capacity for research has the potential to walk out the door. Biggest areas of EU researchers are in the STEM disciplines, languages, not so much in education, but that's because of the teacher prep kind of teacher preparation programs, so tend to draw staff that are more local and familiar with the various education systems. Looking at the chart here on the right, again, you can see that breakdown of research income. So 11% of our research income coming from EU sources. So Queen's. Queen's University. Yeah, sorry.
I'm just curious about any kind of net effect of UK researchers that are in the EU working now that would potentially come back if they were, lose their.
I think if you were a researcher at a European university, and I'll come to it when I talk about the big research funding schemes in a few minutes, with access to phenomenal amounts of research funding through Horizon 2020 and subsequently we'll be getting Horizon Europe. I don't understand what would bring you back, because in terms of your career and the ability to get funding to do the research that you want to do, there is no certainty in the UK that the UK government is going to be able to in any way replace even a small portion of that funding. The UK institutions are very successful as participants in big European funding schemes. We hit way above our weight in terms of the amount of funding that we secure from Europe. And if that door closes and you come back to the UK, the pots of money that you're going to be able to draw down and apply to are going to be so diminished.
Just on that topic, the European universities have not only done phenomenally at making sure that EU citizens of all types, many countries have created expedited rules and special protocols to allow EU citizens to stay. UK citizens to stay in the EU, but universities in particular have championed that and have offered to solidify their commitment to UK researchers, while at the same time actively poaching UK professionals, not only of EU citizenship, all of those EU citizens who were there, but also UK researchers who were part of collaborative research projects. So especially in the ones that I know in the medical sciences and the biological sciences, where they're part of these huge multi-million-dollar grants, and there's a UK partner, because those grants are personal, in order to not lose that UK funding, they're just bringing those faculty, even the UK faculty, over to Europe, so that the money comes with them. And they're going to lose more than just the EU faculty. They're going to lose UK faculty because they're being offered better resources.
We already are.
Yes.
The Republic of Ireland institutions that we're very collegiate with are openly, transparently campaigning for our leading academic researchers with big research, funded projects to move, and they're moving, and I can't blame them.
But everybody knew it would happen because it happened to Switzerland, where they fell into the same problem when they lost access to Horizon 2020.
The uncertainty is so so difficult for all staff, not just for the EU staff living in the UK, but for faculty, but for the UK faculty too. I mean, we don't know what we're going to face in another year, you know. So sorry. So yeah, Queen's oldest university in Northern Ireland, comprehensive university. We have a med school, a law school. We are a member of the Russell Group, which is sort of leading 24 universities, research intensive, like a R1, I guess, here. And at the same time, we're a very regional university. Queen's is very embedded within the community that it sits in. We have very strong town-gown kind of relationships, huge economic driver, one of the largest employers in Northern Ireland. They bat around figures on things like the university, and I think I'll come to it, contributes over £1 billion into the local economy and is directly responsible for nearly 10,000 jobs. So we have 23,000 students, about 4,000 staff, that includes faculty and team staff. We draw our staff from over 80 countries. So a very diverse university in a relatively homogenous society. And so the Queen's Quarter of the city of Belfast is where you're going to see the most diversity in terms of ethnicity and hear lots of languages being spoken and so on. So really important for internationalization of the university, but also important for internationalization of our city and our community. Yeah.
How does the school interact with government if the local government has been shut down for 2 years?
So at the minute with the local government shut down, we're essentially flat funded. So they've just pretty much been following the budgets and funding models that were in place before the government shut down. Okay. That being said, there have been cuts in some of the schemes. I mean, the core funding that's coming from the local government is still coming, being managed by civil servants, by sort of government employees. But there aren't any changes, and so we're not able to react to things either. We can't go to the local government. And I mean, one of the things at the minute that's particularly bothering me is that English, Scottish and Welsh universities have access to this new, very significant pot of money to build international partnerships, which is what I do every day. And we went to the Northern Ireland Department for the Economy, that is where we draw our money from as an institution, and we asked them, and they said, sorry, we don't have a budget for that because we don't have a government, so we're being left behind in that. And I mean, that's just one personal example in so many other ways. So, but given the diversity of the staff and faculty, we're considered to be pretty international in terms of those metrics. So key priorities for Queen's in terms of Brexit, they started a Brexit working group like the week after the Brexit vote, and it has been meeting every month and sometimes even more frequently since. Senior administrators, right from sort of provost level, trying to plan for something that we don't know what it's going to look like. So it's very difficult to plan for. But they've identified these 4 key priorities, so the research funding, the mobility of staff, the mobility and recruitment of students, and then this relationship with the Republic of Ireland. Our relationship with the Republic as a university isn't just about Horizon 2020 and research funding. It's about, we have faculty, we have shared appointments, we have particular schemes. There's a US-Ireland scheme that requires you to have a Republic of Ireland, a Northern Ireland, and a US partner. There's all kinds of other things that we're knitted together and integrated, and that, there's a great deal of concern about that. At Queen's, we've had more than 70 million in research funding from the EU since 2011. Of our 23,000 students, 1,100 plus are from the EU. Somewhere around 800 academic or faculty and support staff, and 1,500 of our students studying abroad or doing internships in Europe every year. So, we're not a huge university, we're about half the size of UF, and, those numbers are pretty good. You support the International Centre, and I think our numbers for study abroad and for students coming in are pretty high. And in fact, when we look at them, against the rest of the UK. So at Queen's, our academic and research staff, 30% of them come from the EU versus 18% from the rest of the UK. So you have a very strong dependence and commitment to our EU staff for research, for teaching. Same for professional staff. More than 14% coming from outside the UK to work at Queen's. Undergraduate students is about a par with the rest of the UK as far as drawing from the EU, and then grad students we draw a little bit more from the EU than the rest of our compatriots in the UK. Briefly, just on the research funding, the programme I was mentioning, it'll end in 2020, Horizon 2020. 7-year programme, €70 billion research funding that has been available to compete for. And in Horizon Europe, which will start in 2021, it'll be over 100 billion research funding. So huge pots of money that it's hard to see how the UK government could in any way substitute for that. That funding is for us to work across borders, bring the best people together, and build those scientific networks. At the minute, if you're funded, basically they've said your project will continue until it ends and your funding is secure. But if you're applying for funding, that starts to become less clear. So if we get a withdrawal agreement, then that money will be guaranteed. You'll get the funding that you apply for through the end of 2020. We'll be able to apply for funding. However, if we crash out, that there is no real guarantee there. What the UK government did was that they said they would underwrite the commitment to funding. So if you apply for funding today, and then we get a hard Brexit, the UK government have said that they'll guarantee that funding. Sounds great, but in Europe right now, I don't think the UK government have a huge amount of credibility. And a lot of researchers in European universities are saying, yeah, we don't trust that. We're not sure that you're actually going to come through. So we're going to spend all this time, we're going to write an enormous proposal. Hopefully we're going to win it. And then you're going to crash out, and where's the money for your piece going to come from? And actually what we're seeing now is EU institutions, universities asking Queen's to underwrite the application. So they're asking our university to warranty that if they get funded, the UK leaves without a deal, that the university will put the money up and run the project. And we're not in a position to do that. I mean, it's just, we're talking millions of pounds or euros of research funding, and the university simply can't promise funds that it doesn't have and doesn't know that we'll have access to. So European colleagues are walking away from joint research proposals. So as I mentioned, these are our main concerns, the research funding and the mobility and those relationships. We have 52 days until the 29th of March. We have no idea what it's going to look like for us at work, for us on the border, for transport, for healthcare. I mean, Amy was joking that she's coming to Northern Ireland in June and she doesn't know if she'll be able to fly in. There'll be questions about airspace and licensing. If you're driving a big truck across the border, you have to have a heavy goods vehicle license. They've only given a few permits to Northern Ireland. We have hundreds of thousands of trucks crossing the border every month. So we are in a really difficult position in Northern Ireland at this point. And 34 days that they're going to sit in Parliament, I don't know where we're going to end up. It's really
So on that cheerful note,
yeah.
do we have questions or comments?